The cubs are on the human's lap, sir. The human is smiling? Ambassador Jitaro's voice cracked across the secure channel as he stared through the reinforced viewport of the observation lounge. His secondary hearts were accelerating, a response he hadn't experienced since the Kelthian breach 17 years ago. His mandibles clicked involuntarily. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. A tell he thought he'd mastered decades of diplomatic training ago. Captain Vexthul's response came through with the precise calmness of someone pretending everything was normal when absolutely nothing was normal. Ambassador, I need you to repeat that transmission. The cubs are where? On her lap. Jitaro enunciated each word like he was speaking to someone whose cognitive functions were failing. Both of them. The female has one draped across her shoulders. The smaller male is curled against her ribs. They are purring? Is that the correct term? They're making sounds I've never heard from a predator cub outside of maternal bonding scenarios. 17 decks below, in Observation Lounge 7, Emma Johnson turned the page of her worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit and didn't miss a single word of the narrative. But the rabbit was real to the boy, she read, her voice carrying the particular cadence she'd perfected over 15 years of teaching kindergarten. He was real because the boy loved him. Being real doesn't mean having things happen to you. It means you belong to somebody who cares. The larger Vexthul cub, nearly 2 meters of sleek, obsidian predator with claws that could pierce battleship hull plating, made a sound like wind chimes mixed with a cat's purr. Its ears, normally flattened against its skull in hunting posture, were relaxed, pointed forward in what Emma had learned to recognize as curiosity mixed with contentment. She didn't look up from the book. She never looked up from the book. You're going to love this next part, Emma murmured to the cubs, her free hand absently scratching behind the smaller one's ear. The creature's eye ridges closed in something that was definitely satisfaction. There's this whole thing about Christmas and understanding what matters, and honestly, I think you two are going to get it. On the command deck, 8 levels up and surrounded by holographic displays showing Vexthul attack formations and human evacuation protocols that had become utterly irrelevant in the last 7 minutes. Admiral Kael Thas stared at the live feed with the expression of someone watching the fundamental laws of physics reorganize themselves. How long has the human been in there? He asked quietly. 43 minutes, sir. Lieutenant Sinara reported, her voice steady but her neural readings showing spike patterns that indicated something between scientific fascination and existential terror. She entered with a book approximately 48 minutes ago. The cubs approached approximately 5 minutes after she began reading. She has not ceased reading. The cubs have not attempted predation. Current threat assessment is unclear. Unclear, Kael Thas repeated flatly. Yes, sir. Our behavioral models predict 99.7% probability of lethal encounter within 90 seconds of contact. We are now at 43 minutes. The cubs have moved closer 3 times. Each time they have settled against the human rather than initiating attack sequences. Jitaro watched as Emma turned another page. The cubs shifting with her movements, never breaking contact, never showing the signs of hunting focus that should have been automatic. Their pupils were normal, not the dilated predator's gaze. Their body language was loose, comfortable, almost trusting. The human is talking to them, Jitaro reported, watching Emma's lips move as she narrated and occasionally spoke directly to the creatures beside her. She's saying something about settling down. She's saying they'll feel better once they hear how the story ends. She's aware of the cubs. Command's voice had taken on the quality of someone asking if their house was currently on fire. Extensively aware, sir. She seems to think they're just children who need entertainment. In the lounge, Emma reached an especially tender passage and read it with the kind of genuine care that came from a lifetime of making sure every child in her classroom felt seen, mattered, belonged. The predator cubs made sounds that no xenobiologist in the Vextool Empire had ever recorded a predator cub making while in contact with another species. They were the sounds of listening intently to a story that was changing them forever. Admiral Kyle Thas made a decision that would later be analyzed in 100 military academies as either genius or the moment the Vextool Empire began its transformation. Activate containment protocols. Now. The command deck erupted into controlled chaos. Red emergency lighting flooded the observation lounge. Steel barriers began descending from ceiling apertures. Security teams in full tactical gear assembled at the lounge's primary entrance. Weapons configured for maximum lethality with minimal collateral damage. Through the viewport, Jitaro watched Emma calmly turn the page. She didn't flinch at the alarms, didn't react to the barriers, didn't even pause in her reading as the security teams burst through the secondary entrance. Weapons raised, thermal scans active, ready to execute an extraction that had exactly a 3% chance of succeeding without bloodshed. The larger cub's head snapped toward the noise. A predator's response, finally. Its pupils dilated, its muscles tensed. For the first moment in 48 minutes, Jitaro thought they might actually see the killing instinct activate. Emma read louder. "Now, here's where it gets really interesting," she said, her voice carrying that particular warmth that could cut through any chaos. She'd used it to calm terrified 5-year-olds during fire drills, during their first days away from home, during the dark moments when being small felt unbearable. The fox family learns to live alongside the other animals because, well, everyone needs friends. The cub's pupils constricted again. Its muscles loosened. It didn't attack the security teams. Instead, it made a low trilling sound, almost musical, and pressed its head against Emma's ribs, seeking the source of the voice the way a newborn seeks its mother's heartbeat. The second cub was already asleep, one massive paw draped across Emma's leg, its breathing synchronized with her cadence. "Stand down," Kael'thas ordered through the comm. The security teams didn't lower their weapons, but they stopped advancing. "Ambassador, I need a full biometric panel on those cubs, now." Jitaro keyed the request to the science deck. 30 seconds later, the responses came flooding back, and they were impossible. "Sir," Lieutenant Sonara's voice was trembling, actually trembling, with something between awe and horror. "Their predatory neural systems are in dormant state. Complete dormancy. The hunting protocols are not suppressed. They're not activated at all. They're offline." "That's not possible," Kael'thas said flatly. "Vextool cubs don't go dormant. Their killing instinct activates at approximately 17 days post-gestation and never stops until they encounter a human reading children's literature, apparently, sir," Sonara finished. "Stress hormones are at baseline. Cortisol equivalent is lower than if they were sleeping. Their neural activity in the predation centers shows zero engagement. Instead, their patterns are concentrated in the social bonding regions. The regions that..." She stopped, clearly struggling to process her own data. "The regions that only activate in maternal relationships." Jitaro gripped the viewport frame. "The human is being read as a maternal figure?" "Not exactly. Sinara said slowly. More like, the human's voice pattern is triggering the same neurological response as a maternal hunting pause call. You know the sequence. When mothers temporarily suppress their instincts to teach cubs the difference between prey and non-prey. I'm aware of the biological mechanism, Lieutenant, Kyle Thas said acidly. The human's voice is hitting almost identical frequencies. Her speech patterns, her cadence, her phrasing, it's all neurologically equivalent to the pause state. The cub's brains are interpreting her reading as an instruction to temporarily suspend predatory programming and engage in social learning. In the observation lounge, Emma kept reading, completely unaware that she was neurologically rewiring two apex predators with nothing but a children's book and 15 years of experience teaching 5-year-olds to listen. Sir, Jotaro said quietly, I don't understand. The cubs should have activated killing protocols 30 seconds ago. The human is touching them. Directly. With unprotected hands, our behavioral models predict that tactile contact alone should trigger predatory response. Everything in our evolutionary biology says they should be eating her. There was a long silence from the command deck. Finally, Kyle Thas spoke. Get the cubs away from the human immediately. Full containment. I don't care about diplomatic incident. I don't care about first contact protocols. I want those cubs separated from that human now. Sir, Jotaro hesitated. If we attempt forced separation now, the cubs may activate defensive protocols. The human could be injured. Another silence. Then, Kael'thas said slowly, we wait. We maintain containment around the lounge. We monitor every reading. And we pray that when this ends, we still understand what we are. Emma turned the page. The cubs dreamed predator dreams with their hunting instincts offline, learning through story and voice what their entire species had evolved to deny. That connection could matter more than conquest, that someone reading to you could change you forever. Dr. Sinara had won the Kelthian Prize for her groundbreaking work on Vextool predatory neural architecture. She'd published 43 papers on evolutionary hunting behavior. She'd spent 20 years studying the biological immutability of apex predator instinct. She arrived at Observation Lounge 7 expecting to document a tragedy. Instead, she watched a kindergarten teacher turn a page and ask, "Do you want to know what happens next?" The larger cub made a sound that Sinara's instruments registered as a request for continuation. The smaller cub, which had been sleeping against Emma's leg, lifted its head and produced an almost identical vocalization. Emma smiled, actually smiled, and kept reading. Charlotte was in the middle of her web. Emma continued, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had read the same book 500 times and meant every word like it was the first. She was busy at her work. The early morning light shone through the web and made it look like a fine piece of lacework. Sinara's neural analyzer was recording 17 simultaneous impossibilities. This violates 17 fundamental principles of Vextool development, she said aloud, not realizing she'd spoken until Jotaro glanced at her with something approaching sympathy. Emma finally looked up from her book. From Charlotte's web, Sinara noted with a spike of analytical interest. A story about cross-species friendship and the value of social bonds. The cubs were literally learning their species' entire evolutionary philosophy was wrong through pastoral spider allegory. You guys really don't do story time? Emma asked, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. That explains a lot about your greeting protocols. There was a pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds, during which the entire foundation of Vextool diplomatic relations briefly caught fire in Sinara's mind. The human is suggesting, Jotaro said, slowly, that our cultural emphasis on dominance hierarchies might be connected to our lack of childhood narrative education. Obviously, Emma said, returning to her book. Storytime teaches kids that other perspectives matter, that complexity exists, that even if someone's different from you, they might be worth listening to. You can't learn that from hunting protocols. Kael'thas's voice crackled through the comm. Dr. Sinara, can you explain what's happening? Sinara was silent for a long moment, watching as the cubs, both cubs still alive, still in contact with the human, still showing zero predatory activation, responded to Emma's continued reading by relaxing even further into the cushions. The human. Sinara began slowly, each word a small surrender to impossibility, is rewriting their predatory framework. Through narrative construction and vocal patterns. I have no explanation. This shouldn't be neurologically possible. How long can it continue? Kael'thas demanded. Indefinitely, sir. As long as the human continues reading, the cub's predatory systems remain dormant. They're not being suppressed through neural inhibitors or behavioral training. They're being fundamentally rewired through exposure to empathy-based storytelling. The cubs are learning that entities they would normally categorize as prey are complex, sympathetic, deserving of... She struggled for the word. Friendship. Emma turned another page. Is this a problem? Emma asked, not looking up. I do this 5 days a week with kids who throw tantrums and pick their noses. These two are angels, way more attentive than my Monday morning kindergarten class. The human is comparing apex predator cubs to her standard pedagogical population, Jotaro reported numbly. Sir, Sinara said, her voice carrying the weight of someone watching everything they'd ever believed reorganize itself. The human isn't using specialized techniques. She's using basic educational principles. Engagement, empathy, narrative structure, consistent vocal reinforcement. The human appears to be unconsciously applying the same methodology across all young sentient beings. What does that mean? Kael'thas asked. It means, Sinara replied, watching as the smaller cub moved closer to Emma's chest, seeking proximity to the voice that was fundamentally changing its neural architecture. We evolved to resist something that another species considers completely unremarkable. We spent 10,000 years developing predatory perfection while other species learned to read to their young. And now, a human kindergarten teacher is casually demonstrating that what we built our entire civilization on, the inability to see others as anything but prey, is a choice, not a law of nature. She stopped, staring at Emma as the human continued reading about a pig named Wilbur and a spider who saw his value. We lack defenses against kindness, Sinara whispered. We evolved to resist everything except someone treating us like we matter. Emma turned the page and kept reading. The cubs listened, and they changed. Ambassador Jotaro made a decision that would have ended his diplomatic career if anyone had been thinking about careers at that moment. He deactivated the containment barriers and walked into Observation Lounge 7. Emma looked up mid-sentence, marked her place with her finger, and smiled at him with the exact same warmth she'd been directing at the cubs. Oh, hello, she said. Do you want to hear the ending too? They're just getting to the really important part where they all understand each other. Jotaro felt something in his chest reorganize itself. A question emerged, one he'd been trained never to ask about any other species, much less apex predators. Aren't you afraid of them? Emma looked surprised. Actually surprised. Why would I be? They're just kids. Curious, smart kids. Little ones always are, no matter what species they are. They ask good questions, they listen really well, and they care about what happens to the people in the story. She gestured to the larger cub. This one actually got upset when the main character was sad. That's empathy. That's learning. On the command deck, Admiral Kael'thas felt something break inside his understanding of reality. She has no idea, he said flatly. The human doesn't know what they are. Sir, Dr. Sinara was pale, her mandibles trembling. If that's true, then this wasn't a calculated diplomatic maneuver. She genuinely sees them as children. Calculate the implications, Kael'thas ordered. 30 seconds of processing later, Sinara's voice came back unsteady. If the cub's predatory frameworks are being rewritten by someone who views them with genuine affection and pedagogical intentionality, the neural rewiring will be permanent. They're not learning to suppress instinct. They're learning that instinct wasn't their only option. That's not a temporary state, sir. That's a new developmental pathway. How many other cubs could learn this? All of them, sir. If we implement proper protocols, if we train educators, if we... She stopped. Sir, we could fundamentally transform our entire species, not through force or biological engineering, through storytelling, through someone caring enough to teach them that other perspectives matter. In the lounge, Emma had just reached the climax of Charlotte's web. Charlotte was in her web, Emma read, her voice carrying the weight of something profound and ordinary simultaneously. She had written a message. The message was a short one. It said, "Terrific. That's Wilbur." Charlotte had decided he was terrific. Both cubs made sounds that Emma's ear, trained by years of listening to 5-year-olds process complex emotions, recognized as wonder. And they learned, Emma continued, reading the final pages with the reverence they deserved, that listening to each other made everything better, that even different creatures could be friends if they tried. The larger cub looked at the smaller one. The smaller cub looked back. Then both turned their heads toward Emma, and one of them made a sound that Dr. Sinara's instruments registered as a perfect neurological match for contentment approximation. Emma closed the book gently. "That's the end of today's chapter," she said. "Same time tomorrow?" The cubs made sounds that indicated not just agreement, but anticipation. Jotaro watched from the lounge entrance. On his face was an expression of someone witnessing their species' future being written in real time by a human who thought she was just reading a book to children. Kael'thas entered the lounge himself, moving with the careful steps of someone approaching something sacred. The cub's ears flattened slightly, a defensive response that immediately corrected to curiosity when Emma made a gentle gesture. "What you've done," Kael'thas said slowly, each word weighted with the understanding of what came next. "We may need to understand it better." Emma finally looked up, confusion crossing her face. "Did something weird happen? You guys all look stressed." "You've potentially altered the trajectory of an entire species," Kael'thas replied. "And you did it by accident while reading children's literature." Emma blinked. Then she smiled the way she always smiled when people didn't understand something that was actually quite simple. "Oh, well." She looked at the cubs, who were settling back against her legs with obvious contentment. "Can I keep them for one more chapter? It's a really good part coming up, and I think they're going to want to hear it." Jotaro to Kael'thas through the comm. "The human wants to continue the storytelling session, sir." Kael'thas, his centuries of military training collapsing into something approaching awe. "Let her. I want to see what else these cubs learn. This is either the beginning of peace or the greatest security risk we've ever encountered." Emma, pulling both cubs closer as she retrieved the next book from her bag. Honestly, I think you're all overthinking this. Sometimes kids just need someone to care enough to tell them a good story. Everything else works itself out. She opened the next book. The cubs settled in to listen. And in that moment, the Vextool Empire's 1,000-year understanding of itself began to transform into something neither aggressive nor passive, but something they'd never had words for because they'd never developed the capacity to imagine it. Something that looked, from the outside, like hope. 4 hours later, Emma Johnson had read through Charlotte's Web, Where the Wild Things Are, The Tale of Despereaux, The Princess Bride, and 2 volumes of poetry that she kept in her personal collection, just in case there were thoughtful aliens who needed existential reassurance. The Vextool cubs were unconscious on either side of her lap, their breathing synchronized, their neural patterns running continuous feedback loops that Dr. Sin Ara had stopped trying to explain to Command, and instead was simply recording for posterity. This, she understood, was history. On the command deck, Admiral Kael'thas stared at a document titled The Emma Protocol and wondered if his entire civilization had been asleep for 10,000 years. "We need human input on Vextool youth development," Dr. Sinara was saying into the conference comm, her voice carrying the particular quality of someone who had watched their entire field of expertise reorganize itself. This changes everything we know about our species. Everything. Our predatory frameworks, our social hierarchies, our approach to every other species in this sector. All of it was built on the assumption that aggression was instinctive rather than learned. But if narrative-based education can suppress those drives this thoroughly, then we've been choosing predation. Jotaro finished quietly. We were never trapped by our biology. We were trapped by our decisions about how to teach our young. We were focused on our predatory perfection. Jotaro continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone watching their species' mythology dissolve. But we missed something fundamental, what the human called connection through narrative. Our cubs responded to that, not in spite of their instincts, but because their instincts include social bonding we've trained ourselves to suppress. We programmed them to hunt. She unprogrammed that with a book about a spider and a pig. A station maintenance worker arrived with coffee and a sandwich for Emma, moving carefully as though approaching something sacred. Because, Sinara realized, they were. Emma carefully maneuvered out from under the sleeping cubs, who immediately found each other, curling together without waking, their neural patterns maintaining the contentment frequency they'd achieved hours ago. She stretched, took a long sip of coffee, and made a satisfied sound. "Okay, those 2 are down for about 40 minutes, she said to no one in particular. "You got anything else I should read to them? I've got a great one about a little dragon learning to make friends." An alien security officer stared at her in what could only be described as bewilderment. "You're calm about this." Emma smiled the way she always smiled when people didn't understand something that was actually quite simple. "Honey, you haven't seen me handle a food fight situation with 18 toddlers. This is relaxing." On the command deck, Kael'thas felt something that might have been laughter trying to escape his chest. "She's treating this like work," he said slowly. "She is treating this like work," Sinara confirmed. "Consistent, professional, compassionate work. She's applying pedagogical methodology to apex predators with the same attention she applies to her native species young. She's not even aware that she's doing something impossible." Emma pulled out a well-worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are and settled back into the comfortable space between the sleeping cubs. "Wonder if they have wild things," she murmured to herself, flipping through the pages. "Probably less patient than these 2. Dr. Sinara watched through the viewport as Emma began reading to the sleeping cubs anyway. Her voice a constant presence, her commitment to storytelling absolute. "Sir," Sinara said to Kael'thas, "the human is humming. I believe this is happiness." Kael'thas looked at the data streaming across his screens. Neural patterns of cubs showing permanent restructuring. Diplomatic frameworks being rewritten in real time. 1,000 years of military doctrine becoming obsolete. And at the center of it all, a human kindergarten teacher humming to herself as she read bedtime stories to apex predators. "Let's document everything," he said finally. "And someone get her more books, all of them, every children's book in the Federation database. We have a lot to learn from this human." Emma turned the page. The cubs dreamed dreams where they listened instead of hunted. And in those dreams, the entire Vex Tool Empire's future was being quietly, permanently, irrevocably rewritten. Not through conquest or diplomacy or military might. Through someone caring enough to tell a good story to children who didn't know they were capable of becoming more than what their species had decided they had to be. The cubs' neural patterns would take their civilization generations to understand. But Emma already understood. She'd been teaching that lesson all along. She just didn't know she was teaching it to the fate of worlds.